comments with the PowerPoint, and then we'll reserve the bulk of the time we have for question and answer, discussion based on what we'd like to talk about. So, make sure we're all on the same wavelength to begin with. Hunger. Population of the world today is what?
7 billion.
7 billion, yes. As of Halloween, the UN announced we're at 7 billion. Our focus is on the bottom billion of the world who are the most chronically hungry. 400 million of them are children, more than the entire US population. The slide's not updated, but let's say, as a silent emergency, we have now 7 billion on our planet. In our line of work, we focus on the poorest of the poor, the hungry poor. They're categorized different ways, but basically the criteria are they live on less than $1 a day, they spend 70 cents or more on food of that dollar, and they're mainly women and children. They also tend to be the most vulnerable in that particular society, which, again, very, very similar depending on whether you're in the first world or the third world or wherever you are. Indigenous people, the landless, the uneducated, those without access to land generally or income. Very, very, very similar. Hunger and malnutrition is the first risk. Number one, risk to global health today. Kills more than AIDS, malaria, and TB combined. We have thousands of people a day dying from hunger, most of them children. We don't often quote numbers, but just on average, it's 25,000 people a day dying of hunger. And 18,000 of that, 25,000, on average, children. And the irony is that we have enough food to feed everyone in the world. At 7 billion, we can provide way over the basic calories that we, as humans on this planet, require, a couple times over. For now, that's the good news. The bad news is by 2050, when Professor Edwards and I and a few others might not be around anymore. I said Edwards and you're Richards. Edwards is a nice name too. Richards.
I called you David. I called you
David
in an email back.
And Dan too. So. You see, we're already losing it. We're fading out because you guys are. And the point I'm making is by 2050 we will have phased out completely. You guys will be running the show, and you think we have problems now in terms of a world financial crisis. Wait till we have a food crisis and can't feed everyone. Then it's going to hit the fan. So for now, we have an opportunity. Now, why is this? Because now you've just learned there's enough food in the world, so there shouldn't be hunger, right? Because hunger is lack of food. Poverty, natural disasters, right? Economic mismanagement in countries around the world, the third world. Conflict and civil strife. Both natural disasters, the second and the fourth, are in the upswing. We have many, many more of those than we used to have. And then the fifth one we didn't see coming. We have lots of very bright PhDs in the UN who sit in offices in Geneva and Paris and Rome, following the world's food consumption patterns and the supply issues and all that. This we didn't see coming to this degree, where today more than 50% of the US corn production, corn for food and people otherwise, is being used for biofuels to fuel our SUVs. We knew this was coming, but not to that degree. And you know what's happened now around the world with rising food prices and the effect that it's had on many, many middle-income countries in particular. So we have a perfect storm. Vicious cycle. Rising food prices, the result of many factors, but also exacerbated by food for fuel, increasing population. This is all what we're dealing with currently. And when I say we, this is the royal we, WFP, but also our sister agencies like UNICEF, World Vision Canada, CARE Canada, Canadian Food Grains Bank. This is a team effort, and we all work to our competitive advantage. But in our case, we have the largest humanitarian agency in the world. And our budget is $6 billion last year. Billion Canadian. B. I'm not bragging about this. This is not a good sign. This is a sign of the distress in the world today. Everything that we raise, all the funding and such, is from donors on a voluntary basis, based on our ability to convince them that we have a problem. So we work around the world. That ratio there is how that typically that $6 billion is split today. When I joined WFP in 1985, that was reversed. So me as a typical country director in a country like Bangladesh, where I spent 3-4 years, I would be working on a development program, which we'll talk about a bit, and then on the side I'd have 15% of my resources for an emergency, for when the monsoon comes or some kind of problem. Today it's the opposite. This is what we call the effects of the CBC effect, or the CNN effect, or pick your network. The idea that donors help us saving that child now. Haitian earthquake, tsunami in Asia, it's great. Wonderful, we need that support. But where we lose our sleep at night is that it's the underlying vulnerability of those communities where we're working with, where we're not helping the way we used to be able to. So the whole idea is that we're trying to break the intergenerational cycle of hunger. Great buzzword. But this is really the core of our efforts on the development side. When it comes to emergencies, we're simply feeding people to save lives now. The underlying issues for us primarily are those of nutrition. Maternal child health, and you're all graduate students, I know, so you know how these programs work. But basically, the idea is that we're trying to set an example through leadership with foods like this. And you all know cereal, right? And milk. Maybe you had toast this morning before you came to work, before you came to school. In Canada, we have ministries. We have legislation in Parliament that requires that these micronutrients, the good stuff on the side of the box, the vitamins, are fortified in these foods, which are targeted towards children. Here you are at Simon Fraser because you had all of this. Whether your parents planned it or not, it just happened. That's the way it works in the first world. It doesn't work this way in most third world countries. So we have to start off by making sure we target the poorest of the poor, most affected by the malnutrition with these kinds of products. Not Raisin Bran, obviously, but local products. And at the same time, work with the government to create that system, which, with legislation and watchdog agencies, eventually, long-term view, so that they eventually do it all themselves. And in maternal child health, the key is to target the women early on. Later, when the children get to school, there's a school feeding program. That's a cup of food that would be served in Uganda. This is from Uganda, I guess. A cup of food costs 25 cents a day. It's the basic porridge, think Red River cereal or something culturally acceptable in that place, with the micronutrients, again, some veg oil, prepared locally. 25 cents a day. And all the nutritional, 80% of the nutritional requirements of the child will be here. It goes in front of the child in the morning, they come to school with an empty stomach, they get the food. In Asia, where we've got often a private sector and more government capacity to work with, which is our preference, we build capacity, and you've seen these before perhaps. These are from Bangladesh. And there we can do the same idea, 5 cents. 25 cents, 5 cents. We do this at scale. And we're building capacity with the local food processing industry. That's the key thing. 80% of the child's nutritional requirement are right here. With HIV/AIDS, this is another program that's very regionally specific. This is more in Southern Africa, but we've learned the hard way, we, the international aid community, that we have to make sure that we always distribute antiviral drugs when they're available, expensive as they are, to those most affected, together with food. Because we found over the years initially that people were selling their drugs for food, rather than to save their lives. And again, this is very typical of the coping mechanisms of many of the most vulnerable who are living from day to day. The drugs are very hard on the stomach, and you can't take them on an empty stomach. And then lastly, this is probably what you're familiar with as well, many of the economic independence trainings and that. The Vulnerable Group Program, VGD it's called in Bangladesh, it's the largest women's development poverty alleviation program in the world there. Food-based, it's got a Grameen Bank component with microcredit. The whole idea is working with communities that I've mentioned that we've targeted to help them basically improve their situation on their own terms so that we can phase out from those communities after a period. There's the hunger map worldwide. The way we define who's hungry and who's most malnourished is based on caloric intake. The UN uses a poverty line level of 2,100 calories per person per day. That's what the UN uses in all countries everywhere in the world. It's up to the countries themselves, but usually they accept the UN standard. The exception is Canada and the US. Does anyone know what the US and Canada use? It's a means-based income level. Poverty line in Canada for a family of 4 is? Anybody know? At what point do you qualify for social assistance, government safety net programs, provincial or federal?
We have a variety of poverty thresholds. After tax, low income cutoff is the most common charted.
Which is?
It varies by city size, by size of family. It's for
Well, a family of 4.
It's about 25,000.
Okay, I'm told it's 30, but anyway. The thing is that, just to make a point, in the US it's about 22, I think. But everywhere else in the world, we're much more concerned about not so much the cash you have, because you may not have access to buy the food, or it might be expensive, the wrong food. We're more concerned about what the calories are.
Before you change that, just for the benefit of people who aren't as close
Yep.
as I am to the screen, could you like to very quickly say what the different colors mean?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to read. The red, the darkest color, is 35% or more. And you can see where those countries are, mainly in Central Africa.
35% or more below the 2,100 calorie threshold?
Yeah. So here's an example specific to Bangladesh about how we approach trying to understand. I believe the land size, you know Bangladesh, I believe the land size of Bangladesh is comparable to Nova Scotia.
That sounds about right.
Sound right? Nova Scotia population is 900,000 people, right? So same land size, those of you who've been out east, same land size, but actually that's old, it's 150 now.
That's 160.
165, give or take a few, 10 million. Population of Bangladesh, so that tells you a lot about how people live. The government poverty line is 2,100 calories, as I've mentioned. We have another category in Bangladesh, which we call the ultra poor, because the needs are so overwhelming, and we can't begin to target everyone. We target at another level, which we collectively with the government call the ultra poor, consuming on average this amount, which is not sustainable. And this is how you die of hunger, guys, at that level. And before when I said 2,500 and 18,000 children, and I know some of you hunger, wow, I didn't know that. People are not dying dead from hunger, right? This is not the Irish famine. There have been very few of those in the world, but there are a few, and we use the word famine, capital F, very rarely and very particular in our business. And that's because there have been very few, and when they happen for a lot of political reasons. And lots of folks have written about this. But that's when people drop dead in the street. That's rare. Usually the deaths come from preventable diseases. Underlying malnutrition issues that a cold that develops badly. Most of those kids I mentioned are dying from diarrhea, which of course is not a disease, it's a symptom. But there are underlying issues that they have. So you feed them all you like, but the kids dehydrate quickly and go. So this is the graph explaining a bit what I first mentioned about income. The higher your income, the less you spend on food. The less your income, the more you spend. This would be Cairo about here, middle income folks in Cairo. That's why the food riots were there, for example. When the food prices go up to that degree, people in that segment of the population are spending 50% of their income on food. And then the prices go up. They really notice it much more than you would here. So in a Bangladesh context again, this is the high water mark a few years back when we were living there. Dhaka is right in the middle of the blue. In a country like Bangladesh, the challenge is simply too many people in the wrong places. And the 20 million people who we target in that country live in the chur areas, which are oftentimes unsustainable land areas, sandbars, places that in most countries like Canada you wouldn't even be allowed to live, nor would you want to, because the land is shifting always. But it's available land, it's very low as well, which in a river delta is not usually a good idea. So you're all bilingual Canadians, right? This is my favorite quote about why this really matters. Sac vide, pas capable de camper. Sac vide, an empty sack. Pas capable is not capable of standing. Unless the nutrition is there, folks, not just the calories. You shouldn't be too surprised that the world doesn't develop the way it does. Stay with me now. I know I'm jumping around a lot here. But you all learned this in high school, I'm sure. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is where the bottom billion are. Basic life needs. The hungry poor. The bottom billion of the world's population. They're not aspiring up here. You shouldn't be too surprised when they're not making contributions to science and culture in their economy in their countries and that. Oftentimes they're a net drain on the fragile economies in their countries. They're the worst offenders in sustainability and environmental areas. Cutting down the trees, the landslide issues and such. And we have a window in the first 1,000 days of life to reverse this intergenerational downward cycle of girls having babies. This is the brain scan. 2- or 3-year-old children, normal and malnourished. You can see the size of the brain, but also the size of the head too. And then the neurons connecting. It's a one-time opportunity, because if you don't reach those children during that time, and sometimes you can go a little beyond the 1,000 days, it's not that the children are dead and die. Their lifespan might be shortened, but the point is they never develop mentally and physically to their full capabilities. That's the point. And then the next step is we can get the children in school, girls in particular. That's when we see the real changes start to evolve in the society. The effect of an educated girl, what that means, and how that affects the society. Simply educating girls. I'm not talking about university education necessarily, although that's fine. We're talking a few years of primary school. The way we look at food security in the world is availability. We know there's enough food. Access, right? You can stand in the market, but if you've got no cash in your hand, you might as well not be there. The access issue, or if you don't grow it. Utilization, this is the technical, biological term of how your body uses the food, if it's able to extract the micronutrients and vitamins that it needs. Again, think of the children dying of the diarrhea. They're not able to. And then the underlying vulnerability that I mentioned before. British Columbia, what would be the most vulnerable segment of our population? Right here in this province, as I've just explained it. Women and children where?
In the reserves?
On the reserves, does someone say? Yes, exactly. Bingo. I live in southern Alabama now. It's rural Alabama. That's a very poor place. There it's a black-white issue. Okay. You're all wondering, what am I doing here? What we've developed in the UN is a hunger studies minor that many schools have begun to adapt. It's not a major, because too many people think everything I just talked about is someone else's problem. You care about it, but it's what someone else does. And that's part of our problem. We want the engineers, the business students, the grad students in different disciplines, all to take time to understand how their chosen professions can help to end world hunger. That's what we want to know.